Hi there! Hello! I'm Clifford Bates. Welcome once again to reading Machiavelli's Discourses. We are continuing in Book 1, looking today at Chapter 23. Now, Chapter 23 is one of the... It follows from what was left in 22. 22 is a very short chapter. It dealt with the question of the story of the three Herotai and the question of the king King Tullus's using the three Herotai against the three Seratai and the three brothers, and then the brother killing the story that story, right? The story, then the three, he sends three, they send the Albion king will say, okay, I'll send my three, and you send your three, and whoever wins we'll surrender to this. If I win, if the Herotai, we will surrender to you, and if the Seratai win, you surrender to us. What happens is the three Seratai die, but one Herotai survives. Herotas survives, and then as he comes back, he runs into his sister, was betrothed to one of the Seratai who died, who's crying, and she kills him, right? And then what happens? His father then pleads for him and the Romans remove him not because of his merits, but because of his father's prayers. So therefore, he comes up with three arguments that one should never use part of, in other words, risk all by using only part. Two, in a well-ordered republic, forgiveness should be based not on merits. In other words, our merit should not be the reasons why we're forgiven in that sense. And then three, that we should not follow. If a policy, if we're doubtful about if we have doubts about doing a policy, and we doubt of our obedience to something we agreed, then we either should or we should not have entered into it. We should not do it. Okay. Now he says the third one in the last chapter. He says we covered that already. This is something so we're going to address the first two. So let's look at the chapter 23. That one should not put all one's fortune, in danger, and not all one's forces, and because of this, the guarding of passes is also often harmful. Okay, this idea of this. In other words, the guarding of passes is often harmful. So all one's forces, and because of this, in other words, don't rely on all one's fortune. You should not put all one's fortune in danger, and not all one's forces. And because of this, guarding of passes is harmful. 2. It has never been judged a wise policy to put all your fortune in danger, and not all your forces. Right? This is different. This is done in many modes. The one is doing as Tullus and Metellus did when they committed all their fortunes of their fatherlands, and the virtue of many men, as both of them had in their armies, to the virtue and fortune of 3 of their citizens, who amounted to a minimal part of the forces of each. Okay, so remember again, we shouldn't repeat this. Nor were they aware that by this policy all the labor that their predecessors had endured in ordering the republic to make it live free for a long while, and to make its citizens defenders of their freedom, was almost as if in vain, since it was in the power of so few to lose it. In other words, all the work they did to make their, the predecessors did to make their people strong and free. In other words, all the soldiers had virtue. In other words, all the Roman soldiers and the other soldiers had strength to do it. In other words, they had more force. In other words, it was not that only these three had the virtue, and the other one else had it, but they all did. So therefore, he's condemned, and therefore, what he's saying here says, in other words, all what the predecessors have endured in order of the republic, to make it live free for a long while, and to make the citizens defenders of that freedom, right, was in vain. This affair could not have been worse conducted by those kings. In other words, the kings how this affair was done by the judgment was badly executed. This inconvenience is also brought on almost always through those who, when they see the enemy, plan to hold difficult places and to guard passes. In other words, they want to hold difficult places and guard passes. So he moves from the question of what happened here, taking 3 and 3. And now the moving is discussing of plan to hold difficult places and to guard passes. For almost always, this decision will be harmful. unless indeed you can conveniently keep all your forces in that difficult place. So in other words, it will be harmful indeed unless you can conveniently keep all your forces. In this case, such a policy is to be taken. But if the place is harsh and one cannot keep all their forces there, the policy is harmful. So in other words, it's an inconvenient place. In other words, unless you can keep all your force, you can conveniently keep all your forces there. So therefore, a difficult place. You hold a difficult place. But if you can't keep all your forces conveniently there, then it's bad. It's only good if you can conveniently keep all your forces in one place. But if you can't, then it is a bad thing. And if this is the case, the policy is taken. But if the place is harsh and one cannot keep all your forces there, the policy is harmful. This makes me judge, thus, the example of those who, having assaulted by powerful... This makes me judge, thus, the example of those who, having been assaulted by a powerful enemy, and having their country surrounded by mountains and mountainous places, have never attempted to fight the enemy in the passes and in the mountains, but have gone to meet them on the other side. Or when they have not wished to do this, they have waited in the inner sides of the mountains, in benign, not mountainous places. In other words, they don't guard passes. They don't guard those locations. They don't do the guard the difficult places. They go on the other. They confront the enemy on the other side of the mountain. In other words, the enemy. They do not fight the enemy in the passes and in the mountains, but go on to meet them on the other side. Or when they have not wished to do this, they waited in the inner side of the mountains in benign, not mountainous places. The cause has been the one cited before. One cannot lead many men to the guarding of mountainous places, whether because they cannot live there for a long time, or because the places are so narrow and has the capacity for so few that it is not possible to withstand an enemy who comes in mass to strike you. So therefore, in other words, you're not able to hold a lot of people there. They can't sustain themselves in a significant time, and they cannot be in such a number that if a larger force comes at you and attacks you in number, you cannot withstand, right? Not withstand an enemy who comes to strike in mass to strike you. It is easy for the enemy to come in mass because his intention is to pass through and not to stop. And it is impossible for him who waits to wait for it in a mass, since one has to encamp for a long time, not knowing when the enemy wishes to pass through places. In other words, wish to pass through places that are, as I said, narrow and barren. Thus, when you lose the pass that you had presupposed you would hold, and in which your people and your armies trusted, most often such terror enters into the people and the remainder of your troops that you are left a loser without being able to try out their virtue. In other words, you're just panicking. They're panicked. They lost it. In other words, you put all your hope in that one passage, and now that is lost. The enemy's going through, and therefore what happens? That terror enters into the people and the remainder of your troops. That you are left a loser because you can't even defend them in the battlefield. You can't. In other words, you're not able to try out their virtue in that sense, as a whole. Yours against theirs. You trusted apart a little bit, and that was able to be crushed, right? So you have come to lose all your fortune with part of your forces. 3. Everyone knows how much difficulty Hannibal crossed the mountains that divided Lombardy from France, and with how much difficulty he crossed those that divide Lombardy from Tuscany. Nevertheless, the Romans waited for him first on the Tarcov and then on the plain of Arrows, right? Now, of course, this is the story of Hannibal. So let's go look at the notes. This is 21, the stories of Hannibal's wars. And then he goes, they had waited for him in the Ternos and the plains of Arrows. They preferred that their army be eaten up by the enemy in places where it was able to win, rather than leading it into the mountains to be destroyed by the malignity of the site. So in other words, they're going to be destroyed. They're going to be eaten up places where there's a chance to win, the plains. In other words, the Romans waited first to met the Tarcov and then the Arezzo, places that there was an opportunity that they could win. If they went to the mountains, they were at a disadvantage, even though they're difficult, right? They preferred that their armies be eaten up in places where it was able to win, rather than leading it into the mountains to be destroyed by the malignity of the site. Why? Because they're narrow and they're barren. You can't, this. Now 4. He who reads all the histories judiciously will find very few virtuous captains who have tried to hold such passes, both for the reasons given and because they cannot all be closed. Since the mountains are like the countryside, and have, in other words, given and because they cannot all be closed, right? Those passes, and since the mountains are like the countryside, in other words, you don't hold passes because they're narrow, they're difficult. They can be, he talked about earlier in paragraph 2, right? Now you can't do this. The mountains. They all cannot be closed, or they can be done through different ways. And since mountains are very like the countryside and have not only customary and frequented ways, but many others that if they are not known to foreigners, are known to the peasants with whose aid you can always be led to any place, whatever you wish. Any place, whatever, against the wish of whoever opposes you. So in other words, you're in the mountains, you can always know the little passageways, you can always get the local peasants who are going to be loyal to you, take to the and bring you through, right? One can bring up a very fresh example of this in 1515, when Francis, King of France, planned to come into Italy for the recovery of the state of Lombardy. The greatest foundation that those who were contrary to his enterprise relied on was that the Swiss would hold him in the passes on the mountains. That was seen later by experience. That was, as was seen later by experience, that foundation of theirs was in vain. for leaving aside 2 or 3 places guarded by them, the king came over by another, a known way, and was in Italy, and upon them that before they had presented, they had a presentment of him. In other words, they had something that they can come up against him in that sense, and that they can move against him. So that, in other words, the Swiss was going to hold them. They relied on the Swiss to hold them at the guards. But the problem is he didn't confront them at the place where the Swiss. He kept on finding a place that was not guarded by another place that not guarded by the Swiss. He came over to another unknown way, and was all of a sudden right upon them. So they retired, terrified, into Milan. And all the peoples of Lombardy took the sides of the French troops, having been disappointed in the opinion that they had of the French, disappointed in the opinion they had that the French were to be held back in the mountains, right? They weren't going to be held back in the mountains. They were told they would be held back in the mountains. They weren't. They went through. They're into the. They retired terrifiedly into the people. And all the people of Lombardy took the side of them. Now, this is Francis I, King of France, invaded Lombardy in 1515 through an unexpected route, bypassing the Swiss, who were waiting for him in the mountains, thus defeating them near Milan in the Battle of Mariego. So therefore, that's the example that he ends on. And this is how he ends the first one, about committing all your forces, or not. You shouldn't commit all. You shouldn't risk all by committing a part. Here he uses the passes argument, and what kind of lands you take. You should put them on a battlefield where you can put all your people in. Here he uses the idea of going through mountain passes and guarding gates as the question of this idea of committing a part rather than a whole. So let's stop here. Let's stop where we're going to look at this. We have any comments or questions, please put them below and I'll respond to them. If you liked what we had to say here, hit the like button, share it far and wide, share it with your friends, share it on social media. And if you've not subscribed, subscribe. Encourage others to come and check the channel out and subscribe. Again, doing all these things, commenting, liking, sharing, and subscribing, all increases the algorithm so that when people search for things like Machiavelli's Discourses, this will be a place where they'll come check. Another thing, if you didn't like it, well, you can, of course, you can thumbs down it, but please say why in the comments. This way people can learn. There's benefits. There's an opportunity that people can learn. Even I can learn. Another thing you can do is, if you want to follow me on social media, the social media links are below. And if you want to know more about me as a researcher, as a scholar, check out my research and scholarship, you can do so through the academic social media links that are below the social media links. And then below those, if you want to help contribute what I do here, you can do so through Patreon or Subscribestar. Of course, I was joking in the previous video about the costs of things. Another thing, big computers and things that, it's going to have to require new things soon, and they're pricey. Another thing, so subscribe to our Patreon. Another way you can help is by, if you haven't bought the book already, you could buy a copy of my book. One of my books, published books, they're currently available. And you can do so through the bookstore. Ask your bookstore, order it through your bookstore if you like, helping your local bookstores and things like this. Another thing you can do is you can order it through an online distributor like Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Libris, Book Depository, or you can order it through the publisher directly. Well, that's it. We will look at the next chapter next. The continue. Of course, this was if this was don't hold your things, then in a good republic shouldn't be pardoned by merits, right? So that's the second thing that was of the three. It will probably be the thing of the next chapter. So therefore, that's it. Have a good day. Take care, and bye-bye.